learning about web automation with Selenium. So let's give Sandeep a hand.
All right. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. And thanks to devICT for allowing me to talk about this topic tonight. So, web automation using Selenium. All right, let's get into it. So, a little bit about me. I've spent about 6 years in QA. Mostly worked with startups and mid-sized companies. That's been mostly my arena. Recently moved about 4 months ago now to Wichita. Loving it. Plus, the Labour Party is so close to Five Guys, so it's a great place to be. And work at a company called ZipRecruiter. So working as a software engineer and test with them, pretty much using Selenium throughout. All right, tonight. So tonight, I wanted to break this up a little bit. So wanted to start from scratch. We're going to go through what exactly is Selenium, why do we need web automation, what are the different types that's available. A little bit of examples. We can go through some examples and figure out how this helps us. Some of the pitfalls of using this tool. I can even show you an example of how you can throw it into continuous integration and some of the other uses. So that's how tonight I'm going to break it down. Just go through a little bit on each topic. All right, so what exactly is Selenium all about? You probably have heard about it before, but what exactly is it? So it's an open source tool that basically automates browsers. So what it does is it mimics a user's action. So imagine if a user is playing around on the site and clicking on a certain link, touching a certain button. Selenium gives you that ability to basically mimic and record or replay those actions that a user just did. It uses JSON wire protocol in the backend, and that's how it's able to interact with the DOM elements. So when you think about IDs and classes, basically interacts with all of those through it. So why web automation? Do we really need it? I mean, might as well just push to production and test it right there, right? We don't really need browser automation. Well, but you sometimes end across situations like this. You have pop-ups on pop-ups. You have a page not found. You have server errors, which probably unit tests are not catching those. And a lot of people are probably complaining about these as well. Clicking on the link doesn't do anything. Doesn't work on their phone. Somehow it doesn't work on their phone. That's the second one. Looks blocked on IE. That's pretty much true. You can pick any browser and it's probably not going to work. And unable to log in. So things that customers or users are reporting back, which probably worked on your machine. It always works on a dev's machine, right? But on the user side, they always report back with these things. And that's exactly why you need it. And this was another use case. So recently, you probably heard about the DNS error that happened. So if the page was down, in case you did not have any other monitoring tool, and if you had Selenium test running, you would know that the page was not returning the response that you needed. It's not really the ideal use case of using Selenium, but it would have, if you had those tests running, probably did know that your site was down. So that's another example of needing it. So, I mean, if those reasons were not enough, if you're an agile workshop, not really using the waterfall model anymore, you probably need this because you're moving so quickly. It helps you repeat a lot of the actions. Speed, I mean, don't have to go in detail there, but it allows you to automate and run these things pretty quickly. You have different iterations. So if you have different combinations, you want to test different combinations. An example would be a login form, and you want to test to make sure that you have different variations of accepting an email address. This is the perfect tool instead of having it tested manually. It's also great when your UI is fairly stable and you're not spending a lot of time trying to just fix the test, because if the UI is changing quite often, it's probably not ideal. But under these scenarios, it's a great tool to have. All right, so what are the different types of Selenium that's available, right? So the number one, the simplest tool is something called a Selenium IDE. So this comes as a Firefox plugin. So it's just a little plugin only found on Firefox. And what it does is it records and plays back your actions. So that's it. All you do is like how you get any other plugins. There's a little tool that sits with the browser, and it records your actions. Well, it's a great tool to get started, but if you really want to build robust test cases, probably not, because it doesn't really allow you to have conditional statement support, or if you want to have like iterations. So those kind of things is not ideal for. And let me quickly show you an example. So here you go. So I wanted to show you, so this is how the IDE tool looks like. It's just a little plugin, and it's recording your actions right now. So when I go into the browser and click on anything, right? Let's go to Reddit. And I'm going to go into a subreddit. So you see what it did. So when it was recording, and right now it was recording, it basically mimics your action. So when I opened up the subreddit, it shows you what it opened. I'll expand it a bit. And then you can do other things. So if you wanted to click on this, it also shows you the click on about, and it does that. So say you stop the recording right now, right? And try to open it up a little bit more. So if you look at what it did, it was basically just recording my actions. So it opened up that particular URL, clicked and waited on a certain link that I clicked on, and it does exactly what he told it to do.
I can't see it from here, but whenever you click on that link, is that link, how is it defining what that link is? Is it looking for an ID, or? So
in this case, it was basically just link text. So if you click on it right now, you see I just clicked on that, right? Okay, so it tells you link. Yeah, it's link equal to data mining. That's the link that I clicked on. But you can choose different ways it clicked on the link too. So it can pick it based on the link, on an ID, or it contains that link text. So it automatically, in the background, it automatically recorded that for you. So if I ever have to replay this, so you'll see that happen here. So it's replaying what I just did, and it was super quick, but I can show that again. Let me try to show it. So you see what it did, went to Reddit, clicked on that, and it opened up the thing that I was waiting for. So this is the simplest way to get started. And if you ever want to change this, or so let's try this, right? And if I changed it to Wichita, because essentially you want to know when it fails. So if I did change this to Wichita, and I played it, so it went to Wichita, but it can't find. So right now you see how it changed to red, because it couldn't find the link text data mining with whatever. Because on this page there's nothing that even matches what it was looking for. So this is the simplest tool that you can actually get started. So you can have your own little script. You can just record it, save this little file for yourself. So you can save the test case, run it whenever you want. And so it's the best way to kind of get started to understand what's happening and how it actually works. But of course, there are a lot of negatives too. One is it's just a Firefox plugin. It's not really available on different browsers. And if you really wanted to have conditional statements, so say you wanted it to run on mobile devices or desktop, can't really do those kind of things. But a great start. All right, so what are the other types available? So the other one is called the Selenium WebDriver. And this is the more popular usage of Selenium itself. So the way it works is it uses something called the Selenium WebDriver API. And that's the library. So think of it as a Selenium library. That's the one that can actually talk to a browser. The way you talk to the browser, or the way you talk to the Selenium library, is supported by a bunch of language bindings. So it's officially supported by different languages. Java is commonly used. Python is a scripting language as well. So you'll find any language that you probably work with has a Selenium library to work with it. So the way it works is, like going back, the way it works on a page, it works by finding IDs or classes or CSS selectors, XPath tags. So by that, what I mean is, so on this page, if you look at inspect element, every single element probably has a class name, an ID, or an XPath. So that's the way that actually Selenium works with it and can actually grab the details. And for you to be able to interact with the page through these elements itself. So I want to show you an example of using the Selenium WebDriver. Yes.
Can you use Selenium ID to export?
Yes.
And then import it?
Yep. Yes, to export what Selenium WebDriver offers, and that is correct. So just going back to the IDE extension itself, and that's why I say that this is a great starter tool, because this little script that you saved, you can also download it in all these different formats. So that script, it automatically converts it into your own little own whatever language you choose. So say, for example, you chose Python and you want it in the WebDriver format, it can actually download it. So and if you look at the code, it actually spits out the whole code for you to work with a Selenium WebDriver. So yeah, that's a good way of actually, if you want to get started, use the IDE, use that to spit out the code and start making changes. So. Go for it.
Is there any advantage of using one language over another other than just familiarity?
So the question was, is there any advantage of using one language over the other? No, there's no real advantage, because it's the Selenium library itself. So all the options that are available with the library is supported by all those major languages. So not really, other than, I mean, the only reason people do it is if your backend framework or the language that you have kind of matches up with this as well.
I was just curious, Kevin doesn't fit here, but who's developing this?
It's an open source tool.
Okay.
So it's available for download for free. Yeah. All right. All right. So going back to the Selenium WebDriver. So this allows you language bindings to be able to interact with the browser. So let's play with an example, and I can show you what it exactly does. I'm going to be using Python tonight, but you could use any language. All right. So first up, you just want to go ahead and import the library itself. So that's what I'm going to do. So yeah. Is there a way? That didn't really.
Check that override default designs.
Is that really?
Wow.
You go view and then it's an active editor. I mean, we can't do this fine.
Now, I mean, maybe I can open it up on Sublime Text. It's easier to control it. All right, so so the first thing that I'm doing is I'm using Python basically to work with Selenium. First thing I'm doing is just going ahead and importing importing the WebDriver. So this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to initialize an object like driver. I'm going to initialize it so that it creates a WebDriver object, and that creates a Firefox instance. So in this case, when I did a .firefox, you could choose any other browser. It could be .chrome or Safari or even Phantom.js, which is the headless version of running these tests, and a lot of people do that. So in this instance, so now you have a driver created. So it has a handle on a Firefox browser itself. So what are we going to do with this, right? So let's try a simple example. In this case, you're just going ahead and getting that URL. So you created a WebDriver instance. Now you want to go and get that URL. What do you want to do with it? Maybe you just want to print the page title. So these are some of the things that you'll easily find in the documentation, but it has a lot of elements that you can work with. So you can print out the driver.title, which prints out the page title. If you want to find, so let's go to devICT. So let's see. You want to make sure that this element is present on the page. So let's go ahead and inspect the element. So this is not really, so you want to try and find a unique element on the page, because what you're trying, and ID is a good way of finding that generally, because IDs are supposed to be unique. But people also use data attributes, because that's a good way of writing tests and maintaining them. Or even just some of the things that we do is creating class names that starts with the T_, which tells the developer that these are required for testing. So don't really mess around, because a lot of times what happens is if you're using the ID or the class names that's defined here, over time people are changing those things, and you don't want to really be fixing them over and over again. But for our scenario, let's just say that we want to make sure that all classes, let's see if you can see it, but we want to make sure that all classes with the class name button -primary is visible on the page. So let's just keep that as a test, and if it's missing, it's a failure. So let's try that. So what you want to try to do is you want to find all the buttons. So this is again, so the .find elements by class name is another WebDriver command. So we are looking for button -primary. So what it does is it goes and finds all the elements which has that class name, and let's just go ahead and print the length of buttons. Let's try to run this. So right now you see, so I initiated a Firefox instance, so it opened that up. It prints the page title. So if I go back here, so I printed the page title. So devICT is the page title, and I printed the length of the number of buttons that has a class name button primary. Supposedly there are 2, which I guess is right because you've used it for events and the Slack button. So that's one way of actually grabbing these elements, and you could do the same thing for, and if you did find elements by ID, would find an ID name, CSS selector, which is CSS selector. What they mean is that would be a div.button. You can do it by XPath, and you can even find by tag names. The tag names are just like H1s or links. So all those stuff that you can easily grab from that. So that's a good starter. So this is a good starter script, but you want to do more than that, right? Like when you're writing a test, you essentially want to make sure that the test either passes or fails. Right now, we really don't know what it's doing. I mean, sure, you printed out a certain number of stuff, but you essentially want to write a test to ensure that certain things are passing or failing. So you could actually then throw in an assert, which comes automatically. So if you want to say it's greater than 3, print an error. So imagine this is a test. Of course, it's going to fail, but I'll show you what happens. So again, you did a .firefox. It opens a Firefox browser, checks for all the details, and you found an assertion error because technically you found 2, but you want to check that there are more than 3 elements. So that's the easiest way to actually throw in some assertions if you're looking for certain elements on the page. But there are a few other things that you can do to clean this up. And one of the things, at least in the Python world, you have a unit testing module. So you could use something called nose tests, and I'll open that up as an example. I already have a little bit running. So it's very similar, but you're using basically a unit test module to actually run these tests. So what happens is, so what it does is, so it cleans up your test generation itself. Because as you saw, every test basically opens up the same little browser, shuts it down at the end cleanly. So you might as well just try to separate out those concerns, because you're going to write like not 1 or 2 tests, right? They're going to be hundreds. So you want to be able to make sure that you're writing that as cleanly as possible. Also with the unit test module, the cool thing is that if you start a function name with test, which is probably similar to all other unit testing modules, it executes all of them. Like it automatically finds functions with the name that starts with the name test, or classes that start with the name test, and executes them. And it also gives you a clean little way of running all these tests. So in this example, so this was just something similar to what we did here, but this was just free flow. In this right here, we're gonna clean it up a little bit. So what I'm trying to do here is set up. It automatically executes this function. The unit test module automatically executes the setup function from the get-go. So you don't have to specifically say, okay, go get me the Firefox browser. I'm going to be testing the page title. So if you see, I go and get the URL, which is devICT. I go into videos. I get the page title, and I'm asserting that devICT is actually in the page title. So if for some reason that devICT was down, that particular test would fail because it wouldn't get back the page title, and you're asserting to make sure that that piece of text is in there. I'm also testing the video section. So on this page, what I'm trying to do is I want to make sure that all these videos are showing up on the page. So similar try. I look for the class names. So in this case, all of them have the class name column medium 3. And at least in this case, they're unique. So it kind of saves you on that aspect. But that's what I'm trying to do. So I go ahead and get that URL. I find elements by class name, which is column mid 3 right here. And I'm asserting that there are at least 6 videos. There should be at least minimum number of 6 videos on that page. So when I actually run this test now, so I'm using something called nose tests, which is based on unit tests in the background. It's just a unit testing module. That's pretty much it. When I run this, it's exactly the same thing. So if you see, what you just saw is actually executing 3 different things within it, because I started each function name with the word test, so that it was actually looking at it as 3 separate things. So even though you're writing one single file, those are actually 3 little separate tests. So when I ran that, it gives me a neat little output saying it ran 3 tests. So okay, so you can actually plug it into like a proper formatter. So it actually formats a test for you. And if there was a failure, it'll also throw that. So in this case, let's ensure that there are like 36 videos on that. So at least we know that it's going to fail. If it doesn't fail, I don't know. I hope it does. So you see how quick it is, right? So it's not, so there you go. So this was the failure output that came. So it tells you it ran 3 tests. You failed one of those. And you can actually see the assertion error as well, basically telling me that the video section is missing, because I'm actually looking for 36 of them. There's other, if you're interested, there's other log output that comes out as well. That's more to do with the browser itself. Yes, Jake.
Can we see that screenshot? I saw a comment.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's do it. So All right.
Like we're looking at 36 things, it doesn't work.
Yep, yep. So there you go. So so one of the cool things is there are a bunch of different fun things that you can do with Selenium. And one of the things is that you can actually, you could write your own little generators. So basically, if it fails, you can take a screenshot at that particular position. So it's easy to debug. So this is what. So in this case, I'm just going to take a screenshot irrespective. So it's a simple little call which says get screenshot as file when you're on that page. So let's try running it now and see what it does. So basically, it should have saved the screenshots. I'm going into the folder. So if you see, you can specify a path where you want that screenshot to be saved, but it threw it into the folder where I ran the test from. So if you look at that, you see that it actually grabbed a screenshot. That's the screenshot of the page itself. So you know you're testing the right page. But one of the nice things to do is, like Jacob mentioned, if an assertion failure happens, take a screenshot at that point, log the URL that you were on at that particular position, so you can actually see the failure that happened. So yeah, so that's just an example of how you can work with it. And that's Selenium WebDriver, basically. So the most important thing that you need to know is that you can actually find elements by all these different types of locators, which is ID, class name, CSS, or XPath. A lot of them do prefer to use IDs. Number one is because they're unique. So it's very quick to find. If you were using a class name that probably showed up 100 times on the page, you're also slowing down the test because it's basically grabbing all those different class names. So ID is generally a safe bet, but if you really want to make it more robust, you can add in specific data attributes as well. Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to that.
Yeah.
In this case, Sandy was writing tests for like another site, but like if we were making the site in conjunction with writing the tests,
yes,
we would have used like more useful class names. Like each one of those videos would have like class name or something.
Exactly, and so that goes into like if you're really practicing test-driven development, where you're writing the test first, you kind of understand how that page is going to be. So that's when you can actually work with the devs and say, these are the kind of locators that I want. These are the naming conventions that we can follow. So when you write the test, you just plug it in, and it's going to pass at that point. So yeah, so that's the general flow nowadays, where you can actually get more into test-driven development, and this fits in pretty well into that system. So the next thing that I want to show you. So that's basically the WebDriver. That's how you can write and get started to write tests today. The simplest way to do that. But you might have looked at, might have thought about a few negatives about it as well. It's great that it offers you to run all these tests in like different browsers, but there are certain things that are missing. So this is just a quick image, but this is how it actually works. You have the bindings, all the languages that you have, calls the API, which talks to the different browsers. I forgot about the image, but there it is. All right, so the third different format is something called the Selenium grid. So when I ran these tests, you saw that they're only local to my machine, right? So I'm limited. I'm on a Mac, so obviously I can't run it on a Windows system. I don't have IE on my local machine. So I'm limited by that, my machine's performance, what my machine gives me. And what if you really wanted to run these tests in parallel? So you basically don't have that option using the way that I just showed you, the simplest format. So there's also something called the Selenium grid, which uses the same WebDriver format. There's nothing different about it. But the way it works is you have different machines. So you could have a virtual machine or an actual machine, like a Windows machine sitting with IE10 or different specific browsers on it. You could have a Linux box, and you could actually just run those tests from your machine, and it farms out those tests to all these different boxes based on what browser you want to run or what combination. So that's basically the grid's methodology. A lot of people, instead of you having to set up different machines and have different browsers, instead of you having to deal with that, There are a lot of companies nowadays called Sauce Labs, Browser Stack. All these guys basically, they have their own virtual machines with all these browsers. So any combination you can think of, they have all those different things. So you could send your test to their machine and they'll execute it for you. So I just want to quickly show you a little diagram. So this is how it is. So say you have this machine, and say that's my laptop, which is the hub, and you execute a command to basically say that I'm the hub. Like in your virtual machine, or you have a different machine sitting, you basically have the same thing, and you tell them that connect to the hub, which has this IP address. So say this machine has, whatever, like 192.168.1.1 is the IP address. You have this other little machine, and you execute Selenium basically saying connect to the main hub server and identify myself as a node. So it could be, so this node server basically, think of it as a Windows machine with IE11. It's connected now to this main hub machine, which is my computer. And you could have many number, any number, whatever combination you need, right? So now when you execute a test and you tell it that I'm not looking for Firefox, I'm looking for IE with a certain browser version, the hub will basically decide which one of its nodes has that combination and sends the test out to actually execute it. So what does that mean? It sounds a little crazy. So let me show you an example of how that actually looks and what is different about it. So the only difference is, so if you notice here, it's exactly the same test. I'm testing the same thing, nothing different. There's only something which is slightly different. So when you actually set up driver, initially it was, with the example I showed you, that is all that I'd done to create it locally, right? So that is what I had before. Now I'm going to change it up a little bit, and those two would basically give me access to run it in a grid format. So this is what I'm doing. So this is where you can tell it what your capabilities are. So you want to run it on a platform that has Windows 10. You want to run it with the browser, Internet Explorer and a certain version. And then you execute something called webdriver.remote, which tells it, okay, go remotely and find me that actual IP address where I can execute those tests. So for the purpose of this example, I'm going to show you, like I just told you, that there are different companies that do this for you instead of you having to locally install it. So there's a company called, like Sauce Labs and Browser Stack and all these guys, there's a company called Testing Bot as well. So if you see what they offer, they allow you to do browser testing in the cloud, basically. So you don't have to maintain any of those combinations. So let's try to send it. So let me show you what I'm going to try to do. So if you see here, what I'm trying to tell it is go choose me, go get me a browser, which is Internet Explorer, version 11, and of Windows 10 platform. It's going to execute it and send it and talk to basically basically an IP address which Testing Bot owns. If I had my own farm, it would be a local whatever my IP address was. But in this case, I'm sending it out to Testing Bot to run these tests. So let me try running it, and we should see. Execute it. So I executed it right here. It's basically send the test off to Testing Bot, which we should see here. So let's see, when I refresh the page. So right now, it's actually executing my test. So you see how it tells me that it's trying to run it against IE11, and it finished running it. So it ran for 18 seconds. You can actually see it run. And this was the test name that I ran, right? Test page title. So when you click on it, the nice thing about these tools is that it automatically takes a video as well of the whole flow. So, and it also gives you all these details. And if it failed, you would actually see that it failed. So that's one nice thing rather than you having to build it out. So you can actually see what it did. Oh, that's weird. Well, it's I11, so pretty sure it did something. There you go. So I don't know if you saw it, but all that I did was basically open up videos. So it shows you what it did. It opens up the page. That's pretty much it. But you can actually gather videos and have that record over time. You can build this out yourself too, but rather than going through all those pains, services like these are available. So you could write a test, send it off to them, and they have capabilities to run it against any different combination. You even want to run it on IE7 for some reason, they have that available. So that's basically what Selenium Grid offers, and how you could actually then start running tests in parallel. You can run in like the same tests on different browser combinations, and really start maintaining that level of testing automation suite. So those are the three. So just to recap, those are the three different parts. One was the IDE, which is the simplest way to get started. Just you could create something locally, save it, and have a quick run through. And the WebDriver itself, where you can quickly write some scripts in the language of your choosing. And this is the grid, which allows you to then run these different tests parallelly across different browsers. All right, some pitfalls, so these you'll see when you actually start writing the tests. A lot of these browsers, I mean, modern day websites are, of course, heavy on JavaScript, heavy AJAX action as well. So a lot of these elements may not be even present on the page when you're trying to find them. Because Selenium, what it does is you're going to try to find an element by class name, right? What if that class name has not been populated yet? What do you do? Because Selenium is going to fail straight away because it just can't find it. So there are ways to handle that as well. And the other thing that I mentioned, if you have constant site updates, you really don't want to be constantly shifting and changing the class name. And there's a class name change. It's technically not a true test failure. So you want to try to minimize those kind of changes. And especially, and the third thing, this again comes down to like good test design. If you're doing database validations, so basically a user logs in, and then you want to connect to the database to make sure that that user who logged in on the UI actually made it into the database. But if you're running these tests in parallel, you want to make sure that there's no race conditions and there's no mismatch and those kind of things. So it's mostly just writing better tests. So with the so for the sleeps itself, so there's a way where you can just make you can have a hard sleep and just say that, okay, program shut down for like 5 seconds and wait till the class name appears. But Selenium has offered something where you can use, which basically tells it that there's a max timeout of like whatever, 10 seconds. So you wait until 10 seconds for that class name to appear. Or if it finds it before then just go ahead. So don't really wait or have a hard sleep for like 10 seconds. There is one example where I can show you on the devICT website. So if you look at the events page, you'll see that there's a loader, right? And it takes a few seconds. And if you really, if you want these events are showing up, that's probably a good start to actually put in that extra logic to say that don't throw an error immediately on if you don't find those elements. So the way to do that is it's a pretty simple thing that they offer, but you have to take that into account when you're writing these tests. And I want to show you that example. I opened PyCharm again. So what it offers is, so here basically what I'm testing is go to the events page and go find all the event results. And I'm asserting that there are at least 5 events. So let's see when I run this test what it does. Nothing different. It's all the same thing that I just showed you. So let's see if it passes or if it actually fails. So there you go. It actually failed because it couldn't find that event section because it was still loading. It takes a few seconds to actually find it. So one way to actually do it is what I was talking to you about is there's a wait function that it provides. So what it's telling it is wait for a maximum period of 10 seconds, and you're waiting until the presence of that element is found. So, and that's pretty much it. So you can tell what element are you trying to wait for. So you can say you can wait for the visibility of certain element, or you just want to make sure that an element is present before going ahead with the test. So in this case, I'm saying wait for a maximum of 10 seconds. If you find it earlier, great, move ahead. But you wait for 10 seconds for this element, which is the events blocks. So wait until then before you go ahead with the test. So now when I run that, let's see if it actually takes into account. So you saw how it actually waited for those. It was pretty quick, but if you see here, it passed this time around because it waited for that div to be present before moving ahead with the test. So that's another little trick that you can try to keep in mind, because you'll run into those kind of things. It could just be an internet issue, like you're sitting in a place where the Wi-Fi is pretty slow, and suddenly all the tests start failing. That's because Selenium is ready to start looking for elements, but the page hasn't fully loaded yet. All right. So those are a few things that try to look out for those. More modern frameworks, like with AngularJS, we have something called Protractor that was built keeping in mind AngularJS. So you don't have to add all these extra things to it to ensure that an element is present. Protractor basically takes that into account from the get-go, but at least Selenium offers the option for you to have that. All right, so I wanted to bring this topic up about continuous integration is because even though you have Selenium tests, it's not that much different from having normal unit tests. So whatever you do with unit tests, this is very similar to it. So you can just throw that in as well. So it's not really that much different. So I want to show you an example. So you could actually throw it into Jenkins. I don't know what you use for as your CI tool, but Travis CI, Circle CI, it's compatible with any of those. And I wanted to kind of show you an example because I have this repository is connected to Travis CI. So I wanted to show you an example of how that looks. So for those of you who are not familiar, anyway, if you're using Travis CI, you have a YAML file, and basically I just tell it that every time I commit into this particular branch, run a test, and I'm telling it to run this particular test, just one of those tests, but you can tell it to just run the whole folder. So every time there's a commit, you basically run that. Yeah, Jim. Oh, no, sorry. No, I think I wanted to try and because when I wanted to run this test, I wanted to run it headlessly. Like I didn't want to go ahead with because when you're trying to run this on Travis CI, they might not have Firefox installed, or they allow you the ability to install all those things. So you could have gone ahead and installed Firefox WebDriver and XVFB to kind of run it headlessly. But if you don't have to do all that, you don't, because it comes automatically installed with Phantom.js. So in this example, it's actually Phantom.js. So let me show you. So the only difference here is I'm calling WebDriver.Phantom.js, which runs it headlessly. So you don't really see the GUI. But if you do take a screenshot, you will see the whole page painted. So there's nothing different, just that you don't see it. So yeah, and Travis CI comes automatically enabled with Phantom.js, so I didn't have to install it. So line 6 was an error. So yeah, all I'm doing is every time I commit to this particular branch, I want to run this particular script. And that's pretty much it. So it works exactly like any other unit test that you already have in place. And this shouldn't be any different from it. And if I did happen to go ahead and commit, I'll show you. Let's see if I can. So if it did happen to go ahead and commit, you'll actually see that it executed the exact same thing that you saw on my terminal. It basically ran nose tests, and it executed that particular Python file. and you'll see the ran test OK or not. So the build would have failed if there was a failure. So not much different from, people might think that, if it's a Selenium test, it requires some additional infrastructure. Most of the cases, it's pretty compatible with any of other unit tests that you write. So it should be easily plug and play into your infrastructure that you have already. All right. So there's some other use cases too that I just wanted to quickly bring about. You could actually use it for web scraping. It is an interesting tool because you don't necessarily have to write, even though it's mostly used for QA, you could actually use it for web scraping. You could do it for monitoring if you don't really have any other tools. You can use Selenium just to open up a browser, check the page title. If the page title appears, that means the page is up and live, and that's it. You can even do it for load testing, because if you're actually mimicking a user's action and you can run these tests in parallel, and you're not limited by the number of machines that you can actually run these tests on, you can do load testing as well, where you can actually then have 100 users doing the same action at the same time. And this was an example which I wanted to show you where a guy used Selenium to basically buy a bus pass, because every 2 weeks he had to go through this long form to buy a bus pass, and it's like, might as well write a script to do that. So, it's not just, when you think about it, you think it was probably just for QA and QA purposes, but it's a pretty handy tool. And that's what I wanted to show you an example as well, because I think on devICT at sometime back, I think Ben had made a mention about a Wichita site that basically showed you all the garage sales in town. And I found that pretty cool was because you could actually use this for that. I want to show you what I'm doing. So I think it was this website. So let's see. Of course, web scraping is, got to be careful about web scraping because it's not technically really legal. But if you want to use it to just test a few things, and so it's great in that format. But you can use Selenium for those kind of things as well. So this was the case where it's a great thing. They do have a website, but it's not really user-friendly. And I do want to be kept aware of different garage sales that come up. So there is a way to actually use it. I mean, there's no API, of course, to grab all this data. So why not just use Selenium to actually grab this information and grab all the information that I need, which is the address field, the start date, end date, and the categories. So, and that's what I did. So if you run this test, I'll show you the test, but let me just run it to see if it works. But so right now, all it does is goes and opens up that particular web page. I'll show you what I did. So I'm trying to gather all the results, because that's what I want to do. And if you see, what I've done is I've cleaned it up, of course, but I've returned a nice little JSON format where now I can do what I want to do with it. Like, I can add a nice UI layer to it. So what it did was, so I went and grabbed all these different elements. So now I've actually put in the address field. I have the categories. I have the end date. I have the ID as well if I need it, and the start date. So I have all the information now, which is clean in a format that I needed to consume. So these are different ways, and a lot of people have actually done this just for, from a productivity standpoint. If you really want to do something for your own little project, I think it's a pretty cool thing to use. And just going back to the test a little bit, so all I've done here is it goes and gets that URL. So what am I doing? Yeah, so here I go and get that URL. I wait for all the different columns, I clean it up, and then just put it into a dictionary so that I can actually consume it. So yeah, I just wanted to show you that Selenium is not just for QA, even though it's a great tool for like QA automation, but you can also use it for other things as well. And it doesn't take that much to get started. That's why I wanted to show you its integration with CI, or even just adding it as a part of like the test infrastructure. It's pretty quick. You don't have to know a lot. The learning curve is not that high to get started, at least. I think the challenges are when you start reaching 1,000 tests and 2,000 tests and trying to maintain them and really writing it in such a pattern that the tests are actually performing well and it's easy to make changes. So that's pretty much it, and that's what I want to do. Like, give a quick introduction on this, and hopefully you guys find it useful too. Yes.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So, like, is Selenium, Selenium obviously pulls down all the actual HTML and JavaScript from the page.
Yep.
Is it aware of how things are rendered at, a more of a visual level? Like, let's say that I have a certain element and I want to know if it's until parent has been hidden, and so that element is not visible. Is Selenium aware of things at that level?
Yeah. So the question was, I'll try to use that. But so the question was basically if Selenium is aware at a level where it can tell me if certain elements are available on the page or not. Right?
Yeah, like visible
or visible or invisible. So the thing about Selenium is it can only find you visible elements. So which is good in some way, because what they're trying to do is only find the things that a user will see. So it wants to mimic a user's action. So if it's a hidden element, a user doesn't see it, Selenium doesn't see it. So if you try to find an element that's hidden currently, but then becomes active on certain actions, it's not going to find it.
Does it handle like perverse things, like maybe a div that has been sized down to 0 or something like that? Will it recognize that that's not visible either?
No, it's not that smart. Okay. So if you're not using the hidden tag, or if it's not explicitly saying, but it just has like an empty div, it'll bring it back. It'll think that that div exists, and you wanted to find that element, it brings it back. So yeah, it's like what you see is what you kind of get. So it's interesting that you bring it up, because even if the page, in this case, not in this particular case, but let's see if I have another example. But what I'm trying to say is, so say this page was long, right? And you're trying to find an element that's hidden in the screen, it's not going to find it. So you have to find a way to basically grab the whole page, the HTML from the entire page, and try to open up the page completely. Okay, so let's just say that, like on this page, example page, let's say that it had like hundreds of events and it didn't have a page explorer. So you're saying that event 100 would not be visible to Selenium? No, it can find it. So as long as it can find the actual starting div, that's fine. So then it's visible for it from then onwards. Okay. But if it's something that's right at the bottom of the page, and the whole your screen is not opened up completely, it's not going to find it at that point.
That's interesting.
What are the dimensions?
So generally, you open up the screen to its maximum window size, so that you can actually play with it.
So it's actually using your current settings.
Yeah, current screen size.
Headless mode?
Headless, yeah, it does the same thing. So it's actually critical to kind of use it, because if you're using it if you want to use it in a mobile flow, and you want to mimic this in a mobile screen size using a mobile user agent, then you want to know that that element is not present, because you want to scroll down. So there are ways to kind of scroll through the page.
That was my next question. So.
Yeah, so you can scroll and then kind of see that the element is visible. But generally, what you do is just open up the page to its full screen size, like the maximum screen size, and then it can find it. If it can find the starting element, it can find the rest of it.
I'm not sure how it works. So it's not looking at the DOM, it's looking at the visual and then mapping that to the DOM somehow?
Yeah, so from the way I understand it is that, so if you look for an element, right, it straight away tries to find that element, and at whatever is painted at that particular page, at that particular point when it's visually available to it, that's what it finds.
Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Like, Selenium runs as like a Java jar, right? And then that Selenium jar is talking to like the Firefox API. But Selenium's not actually making the request; it's just telling Firefox to make the request, and then it talks to Firefox's API.
Correct. But the Java jar file that is needed is not needed when you use the Selenium WebDriver API. So that has its own little API that it communicates to the browser. But when you do use the grid, so when I told you when you use the grid system, that's when you need to have the Java jar file running on your main machine, where you say, okay, run. So basically what you do is, if you go down that path of having a grid,
I thought you had to have it.
you don't have to all the time have the Java. So if you actually did, so let me show you. So this makes it a little, it adds a little bit more dependencies. So I don't want to kind of like show you that, but so you don't necessarily need it. So basically, you could have a standalone little Selenium server running, which communicates to the browser, and that's what it's doing. So if you ever went down the grid format, you would need to actually run the jar file. So now it's actually running a Selenium server locally, which talks to the browser.
But when you use WebDriver, the WebDriver library knows how to
Yeah.
straight fire.
Exactly, yeah. So you don't have to keep this running. Yeah. So in this case, when I show you Java-jar, that's where you say, okay, register myself as a hub, and you can tell it that this is the hub. And then the rest of the machines, you run the same thing, but then you say I'm the node, and connect me to the hub with an IP address. Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. When I first came across it, I was like, wow, you can do that, which and it saved me a lot of time. So it's a good starter tool to have.
Is this what you use in your day-to-day?
Yeah, so day-to-day is Selenium, but we do happen to use behavioral-driven testing. So even though Selenium is the core functionality, it has layers built on top of it by just using the BDD format to run these tests. So we use Phantom.js because we looked at Selenium as something that can be a quick way to give back results. Because I know people who run these tests for like 24 hours. Because if you're running it on different browsers and 2,000 tests, but we took a different approach. We said let's do Phantom.js. It's not going to be exactly what i11 or all the browsers would be, but it at least catch 80% of the issues. So we have manual QA who kind of looks at does a regression manually, but get a lot of these tests thrown in with Phantom.js, which is much faster than actually opening up a browser and things. So run with Phantom.js, and then we have BDD style testing. All right, cool.
It's anything.
All right.